Good morning once again. So we are now in the last part of our recorded discussion. So we are still in the system development life cycle. So I'm your professor Rebecca R. McElwain. So now we will discuss in detail the system analysis. Recall this is part of the phases of the system development life cycle. So when a new or improved system is needed, there must be a written request for system development. Okay, this is prepared, and that request describes the current system problems, the reasons for the proposed changes, the goals and objectives of the proposed system, and the anticipated benefits and costs. The project development team will conduct the system analysis in 5 steps: initial investigation, the system survey, feasibility study, information needs and system requirements, and of course, we have the system analysis reports. So in the initial investigation, they must have the clear picture, the overview of the problem or need, and sometimes what is the thought to the cause of the problem is not the real source. So you need to look on the root of the problem. Okay? And determine the viability of the project and the expected costs and payoffs. They will also look on it and evaluate the scope and the nature of the new AIS. So the new AIS is useful when problems are results of lack of information, inaccessibility of data, inefficient data processing, and a new AIS will not answer problems such as manager who has too many subordinates, a manager who lacks organization skills, and of course failure to enforce existing problems. They will also recommend whether to proceed, either initiate the project as proposed, modify it, or abandon the project. Okay, so that's on the initial investigation. If the project is approved, a proposal to conduct system analysis is prepared, and the project is assigned a priority and added to the master plan. The development team begins a survey of the existing AIS, and then the proposal will be modified as more information becomes available. Next is on the system survey. So system survey involves an extensive study of the current AIS, which could take weeks or months. So the objectives there are gain a thorough understanding of the company operations, the policies, the procedures, the data and the information flow, the AIS strengths and weakness, the available hardware, the software, and personnel. They will also make preliminary assessments of current and future processing needs and determine extent and nature of needed changes. Of course, they will develop working relationships with users and build support, collect data that will identify user need, conduct feasibility analysis, make recommendations to the management. The data can be gathered from employees, from interviews of the employees, documentation such as the charts, the organizational charts, the procedure manual, and of course, we have also some external sources coming from the consultants, from the customers, from suppliers, from industry association, the government agencies. So if they found some problems on the current system, they will accumulate all this information, gather it, and then put it in some reports. There are 4 common methods of gathering data. They are interviews, questionnaires, observation, and we have system documentations. So in the interview, uh, we have, of course, this is usually common, no, when we are gathering information, and of course this is we have also advantages and disadvantages. For the advantages of interviews, you can answer the why questions. You can also follow up and clarify. There is also an opportunity to build positive relationship with the interviewees and support for new system. But the downfall of it is it's time consuming and expensive, and it's based on the personal bias or self-interest, no? And it can produce inaccurate information. When you do interview, of course, you need to make an appointment, explain the purpose ahead of time, indicate the amount of time needed, and be on time. Be familiar with the interviewee's responsibility, make notes on point to cover, put the interview at ease, and let him here do the talking. You will also pay attention to nonverbal cues. Take notes and augment them with impressions after the interview, and request permission to tape critical interviews. Next, questionnaires. Okay, So in the questionnaires, this can be used when the amount of information to be gathered is small and well defined. The information is to be obtained from many people or from those who are remotely located. And the information is intended to verify data from other sources. So advantage of questionnaire, it can be anonymous, not time consuming to complete, and expensive, and allows the subject time to think about responses. But the downfall of it, it does not allow in-depth questions or answers, does not allow follow-up clarifications, or does not build relationships. It's difficult to develop since you need to put the sentence and words, and it can maybe ignored or completely superficial. Observation is very common. When you are making a system, just observe the process. Okay, so advantage of it, it can verify how the system actually works rather than how it should work, and results in greater understanding of system. One disadvantage of it is time consuming, expensive, difficult to interpret, and people may alter behavior while being observed. When you do observation, you need to identify what is to be observed, estimate the time required. You need to obtain permission, explain what will be done and why. Don't make value judgment. And of course, you need to take note and document impressions as soon as possible. Next is system documentation. So as a must, no, we are the accountant, we are also the designer, so it's a must that you know how to document the system. So advantage of system documentation is it describe how the system should work. It is written form, it facilitates review and analysis, but the disadvantage of this is time consuming and maybe elusive. So when you examine system documentation, you need to keep in mind that the system doesn't always work as it should get per the documentation, and if documentation is unavailable, it may be worthwhile to develop it. And once the data is gathered, document finding and model the existing system. So documentation consists of the questionnaire copies, the interview notes, the memos. Another form of documentation is a system model. We have the physical model and the logical model. So in the physical model, it illustrates how a system functions by describing the flow of documents, the computer processes performed, the people doing them, the equipment used, and any other physical elements. While for logical model, it illustrates what is being done regardless of how the flow is accomplished. So when documentation is complete, you analyze the existing system. You evaluate the AIS strengths, the weaknesses to develop ideas for designing and structuring the new AIS. You try to retain the strengths and correct the weaknesses. Sometimes you need revolutionary rather than evolutionary change. So it's called re-engineering. So it's a must now, especially if you are the system analyst. So you need to look on possible solutions to that particular problem. At the end of this phase, you prepare system survey report. You outline and document the data gathered, provide recommendation that results from the system survey. And then you will conduct feasibility study as what we mentioned while ago in our recorded discussion. Okay? After the system survey, a thorough feasibility analysis is conducted. This analysis is updated regularly as the project proceeds and costs and benefits become clearer. So we have also the information needs and system requirements. So here, so if you already determine the feasibility hurdle, the company identify the information needs of the users. You also document the system processes, including the processes. Now describe what is to be done and by whom. You also look on the data elements, the name, the size, the format, the source, significance of your necessary data elements. So you will look on what would be your particular um, primary key, the secondary key, etc. What elements you are using, you will use numeric, alphanumeric, etc. So you need to document it. Data structure. This is a preliminary structure showing how the data elements will be organized into logical records. Okay. And output also, you need to lay out the system outputs, the description of their purpose, the frequency, and also the distribution. Input is also needed. This is a copy of system inputs and description of their contents, the source, and who is responsible for them. And then constraints, the description of deadlines, the schedules, the security requirements, the staffing limitation, and legal requirements. So the clue here is you need to document all these processes all this needed information for you to review later on if there are problems encountered as you go to the operation and to the implementation stage of your system. Controls, these are also needed to ensure accuracy and reliability, and again, your system must be auditable. Reorganization, if there are changes in staffing, job functions, etc., that would be necessary, so you also need to document it. So for the issues in the system analysis, there is much to be specified even for a simple AIS. So it may be difficult to get employees to accurately articulate their needs, especially if they don't really know their needs and if they don't know how to express their feeling or their particular requirements. So errors are best caught early, so as much as possible, look on the errors in the system, because when you want to correct it later on in your project, so it's very difficult already and it is costly. So the system objectives and constraints. So many entities take a system approach to determine information needs and system requirements. So there are problems and alternatives are viewed from the standpoint of the entire organization as opposed to a single department. So the objectives may include the following: usefulness. Okay, so again, you must have the clear picture on why you are changing the system, why you are buying the system, or hiring an in-house developer, because you want that it is useful and able to help the users to make better decisions. And it also economical, no, meaning benefits exceed costs. And it's the reliability also. It focuses on reliability since data is processed accurately and reliably. And availability, you can assess it when you need it. And timeliness, because critical information is provided first. And then customer service, because you want to be efficient, you want to be cautious about your customers. And capacity, it can handle peak periods. Ease of use, flexibility, it can accommodate changes, especially if it's already big data already for how many years, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, so it can accommodate change. What else? Tractability is easily understood, facilitate problem solving and future development, and of course auditability. And security also, because it is available only to authorized users, so you look on passwords, etc., and some restrictions on your system. Okay, there are often trade-offs between objectives in the system analysis. Organizational constraints make it impossible to develop all parts of an AIS simultaneously. Again, there is no perfect system. Okay, you divide it into modules that are analyzed, developed, and installed independently. So when there are changes, only the affected modules needed to be changed, and then the modules should be properly integrated into a workable system. Because if you will put the system into overall talaga, yung lahat na nandun na talaga. So if it happens, ma-crash yung system, everything will crash, no? So mas nice if we per module yung system natin. So if yung isang module lang ang ma-crash, so hindi ma-alter yung overall objective of the system. So success often depends on the project's team ability to cope with organizational constraints, including the requirements of governmental agencies, the managerial policies and guidelines, the lack of sufficient qualified staff, capabilities and attitude of users, available technology, and limited financial resources. So what are the strategies for determining the requirements? So one or more of the following four strategies, there are four, no, are used to determine the AIS requirements. So ask users what they need. This is the simplest and fastest strategy. So you need to conduct interview, you need to go to the users. But many people doesn't realize or understand their true needs. So again, they don't know what their needs because maybe they are not familiar with the system, or they don't really know what is the best need or what is the best requirements they needed. So it's sometimes better to ask them what decisions they make and what processes they are involved in. So users also need to think beyond their current information needs. So you also analyze the existing system. You look on the internal and external system to avoid reinventing the wheel. So just papaulit-ulit, no, reinventing the wheel. So because the goal there is to become efficient, to become more effective, prompt in decision making. So if you are already comfortable in your old system, and then when you uh, integrate it in the new system, paulit-ulit, no? Reinventing the wheel. Examine the existing system, so you look on the certain modules, may not be used as intended, may be augmented by manual tasks, may be avoided altogether. So it helps determine whether the system really needs to be simply modified rather than replaced. You also create a prototype. So it entails roughing out a system for users to critique. When they see something on a screen, it's easier to identify what they like and don't like. It goes through iterations of improving and reviewing with users until users agree on their needs. Okay, now let's go to the documentation and approval of user requirements. So there must be a detailed requirements for the new AIS should be created and documented. So how to produce the required features is determined during the design phase of the SDLC. The requirement list should be supported by sample input and output forms and charts that make it easier to conceptualize. For non-technical summary is often prepared for management. So once user requirements have been determined and documented, the project team meets with users, explains the requirements, obtain their agreement and approval, and if the agreement is reached, user management should sign off on the requirements. So meron ng mga papers and so on, no, signing of papers. The project development team will conduct the system analysis in 5 steps. The last step na tayo on the system analysis phase, no? System analysis reports. So this is the last step in system analysis. Okay, it summarizes and documents activities, serves as a repository of data from which designers can draw. No, the outline there is the goals and the objective of the new system, the scope of the project, how the new system fits into the company's master plan, the user processing requirements and information needs, of course, the important feasibility analysis and recommendation for the new system. A go-no-go decision is usually made 3 times during system analysis. No? So during the initial investigation to determine whether to go ahead with the system survey. At the end of the feasibility study, you determine also whether to proceed with the information requirement step, and also at the completion of the analysis phase to decide whether to proceed to the next phase. So when the system analysis is completed, the project can move on to conceptual design phase, physical design phase, implementation and conversion, operation and maintenance. So yun na yung the last four phases in the SDLC. Now let's go to the summary, what we have learned from our recorded discussions of the system development life cycle. So you've learned about the 5 phases in the system development life cycle. Diba? What are those 5 phases? We have the system analysis, the conceptual design phase, the physical design phase, the implementation and conversion, and the operation and maintenance. You also learn who are the players in the system development process. So we have several players. You also learn about various techniques that are used to plan development of a system, and you review some techniques for determining system feasibility. You've learned about behavioral responses to system changes and how dysfunctional behavior can be minimized. So thank you for listening, and I hope you read also your SIM so that this would be added to your knowledge in the system development life cycle.